James Walker pulled his car into a pay lot across from Pinnacle Financial in Chicago. It was 8:10 am. He straightened his gray tie, picked up his briefcase, and walked into the lobby. The guard at the desk nodded, checking his security badge. James walked through the turnstile and took the elevator to the 23rd floor. The office was buzzing with employees calling clients, typing documents, chatting around the coffee machine. "Good morning, Maria," James said, passing his assistant's desk. She was sorting through files, her dark hair pulled back into a low bun. "Hello, James," Maria replied, smiling. "Richard complimented your report yesterday. He said you were in good standing." "I hope so," James said, putting his briefcase down by the office door. "It's time for a promotion." He walked in, turned on his computer, and opened his email. Two were from clients, one from a colleague with a question about a project. James began to prepare the details for the call, but at 9:50 the phone vibrated. A message from Linda Carter, the head of HR, "Come to see me at 10 o'clock. Urgent. James frowned, closed his laptop, and walked towards her office. He knocked and entered. Linda sat at her desk, a file in front of her. Next to her was Caitlin Moore, the department secretary. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, her hands fiddling with the hem of her blue blouse. "James, sit down," Linda said, pointing to a chair. Her voice was dry. "What happened?" James asked, sitting up. He looked at Caitlin, but she avoided his gaze. Linda folded her arms. "Caitlin filed a complaint. She claims you harassed her at work. It's a serious charge." James felt the blood drain from his face. "What? This is crazy. I barely talked to her." Caitlin cleared her throat. "It started last month," she said quietly. "You made comments about my appearance. Then you started texting me. I saved them." "What messages?" James turned to Linda. "I didn't send anything." "That's a lie." Linda moved the printouts. "Look." James took the sheets. "The first message, Caitlin, you look great today. Maybe we can go out after work. Signature, James Walker. Next, don't be so strict, let's meet." He clutched the papers, his voice shaking. "These aren't mine," he said, looking at Linda. "I didn't write this. It's a fake." "We'll investigate," Linda said. "The department will check your work phone and computer. But for now, in accordance with company policy and federal law, you're suspended. Give your security pass to security." "Linda, I've been working here for 15 years, James said, standing up. "I have a clean record. You know I'm not like that." "I'm following Title Roman 7 protocol," Linda said, not looking up. "It's not my decision. Go home, James. We'll be in touch." Caitlin was silent, looking at the floor. James wanted to ask why she was doing this, but his throat tightened. He nodded and left. In the hallway, he ran into Richard Hayes, his boss, who was walking with a folder under his arm. "James, what the hell?" Richard asked, frowning. His gray hair glistened under the lights. Linda called. "Is that true?" "No," James said, clenching his fists. "Someone set me up. I didn't do what they're accusing me of." Richard rubbed his chin. "You're one of my best men, James, but HR needs to sort this out. I can't interfere until they're done. It's the law." "I'm innocent, Richard," James said, trying to keep his voice even. "Someone is out to get me." "I hope you're right," Richard said, lowering his voice. "Stay home and stay out of trouble. Call me tomorrow." "Okay," James replied and walked towards the office. Maria looked up as he entered. "James, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "No," he said, gathering up his laptop and papers. "Caitlin accused me of harassment. I was suspended." "What?" Maria jumped up. "This is nonsense. You don't even go near her." "I know," James said, zipping up his briefcase. "They've got some fake news. I'll look into it." "If you need anything, call," Maria said. "It's not fair." "Thank you," James said and left. In the hallway, he noticed two colleagues at the coffee machine fall silent as he passed. One, Tom, turned away. The other, Steve, looked at him but said nothing. James gritted his teeth and stepped into the elevator. Tony, the security guard with the neck tattoo, was waiting for him on the first floor. "James, I was told to walk you out," Tony said, holding out his hand. "Pass." "Seriously?" James asked, taking out a card. "Sorry," Tony said, taking the pass. "Rules." They walked outside. James could feel the eyes of the staff in the lobby burning into his back. He walked to the parking lot, got into his car, and slammed the door. The car was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioner. James took out his phone to call Allison, but he stopped. How could he tell her about the charges? She would explode, start screaming. Better at home, face to face. He put the phone away and dialed David Lester, his friend and lawyer. "David, I need help," James said when he answered. "What happened?" David asked. "Your voice is lousy." "I was accused of harassment," James said. "The secretary, Caitlin. They had some messages, but I didn't send them. I was suspended." "Calm down," David said. "Okay," he said. "If the messages aren't yours, we'll prove it. Tomorrow at 9 in my office. Bring your work and personal phone. And don't talk to anyone not your colleagues, not the press." "Got it," James said. "Thank you, David." He hung up and looked at the road. The house in Evanston was 15 minutes away. Who could have set him up like this? Had Caitlin made it up? Or had someone forced her? He remembered how she had avoided his gaze. Something was wrong. James started the car, but his colleague's eyes still followed him like shadows. James Walker pulled into the driveway of his house with white siding and a neatly trimmed lawn. He usually returned after 6 o'clock, but today, after his encounter with Linda Carter and Caitlin's accusations, he had been suspended from work. He turned off the engine but stayed in the car, looking at the basketball hoop above the garage. Sophie, his 16-year-old daughter, often tossed the ball around in the evenings until he called out that dinner was ready. James gripped the steering wheel, trying to push the events of the morning out of his mind. Caitlin's voice, shaky but confident. "You made comments about my appearance." Printouts of messages he hadn't written. The looks his colleagues gave him as he left the office. He knew he was innocent, but that didn't ease the burden. He needed to tell Allison, but how? She had already chided him so often for coming home late, for living at work. This would only add fuel to the fire. He picked up his briefcase, got out of the car, and opened the front door. The house was quiet. Allison, a guidance counselor at Evanston High School, worked until 4. Sophie was at school, probably in algebra or basketball practice. James dropped his keys on the hallway table and walked into the kitchen. There was a note from Allison on the table. "Buy milk and bread. I'll be late. There's a parent-teacher meeting." He crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. James opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat down at his desk. His thoughts returned to the office. Who could have set him up? He remembered Ryan Collins, his colleague who was also in the running for the VP job. Ryan always smiled, but there was a competitive streak behind that smile. Last week, he had tried to steal James's project by offering his own version of the report. Was it his doing? James shook his head. Without proof, it was just speculation. He took out his phone and dialed David Lester, the lawyer he had spoken to that morning. There was no answer, so James left a voicemail. "David, this is James. Call me when you can." He put the phone down and walked into the living room. Sophie's basketball was lying on the couch. James picked it up, twirled it in his hands, and put it back. He needed to do something to keep himself from going crazy. He turned on the television, but the news about local politics only irritated him. He turned it off and went up to the bedroom. On the dresser was a wedding photo of him and Allison. He in a black tuxedo, she in a white dress, both smiling. 15 years ago, they had been different. Now Allison was often angry, and he didn't know how to get that lightness back. James lay down on the bed and closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he saw Caitlin's face, her nervous fingers fiddling with her skirt. At 3:45 p.m., the front door slammed. James walked down the hall. Sophie, in her basketball uniform and with a backpack over her shoulder, dropped her sneakers by the door. "Hey, Dad," she said when she saw him. "What are you doing at home? You're usually at the office until late at night." "Finished early," James lied, leaning against the wall. "How was practice?" "It's fine," Sophie said, opening the fridge. "The coach was yelling at me for passing badly, but I scored 3 points, so he backed off." "Good job," James said, smiling. Sophie was closer to him than to Allison. He could talk to her about basketball or school without fear of an argument. "Where's the milk?" Sophie asked, rummaging through the fridge. "Did Mom forget to buy it again?" "I didn't have time," James said. "I'll take it this evening." "Okay," Sophie said, grabbing the apple. "I'm going to shower and do my homework." She went upstairs, leaving James in the kitchen. He looked at his watch. Allison would be back soon. He had to figure out how to explain his early return without going into details. He didn't want her to know about the accusations until he had sorted it out himself. At 4:30, the door opened again. Allison walked in, carrying a bag of papers and a supermarket bag. Her brown hair was tousled, her eyes tired. "Hi," she said, putting the bag on the table. "Are you home? Did you take the day off?" "No, just got off early," James said, helping to unpack the groceries. "How was the meeting?" "It's horrible," Allison said, getting out the milk and bread. "One guy's parents were yelling at me for not being able to handle his behavior, like I could stop him from fighting." "I'm so sorry," James said, putting the milk away in the fridge. He tried to keep his voice level, but he couldn't stop thinking about Linda and Caitlin. Allison looked at him, narrowing her eyes. "You're acting weird. Is something wrong?" "Nothing," James said with a shrug. "Just tired." "Tired?" Allison crossed her arms. "Ollie, it's okay," James said, opening the cupboard to put away the bread. "It's just been a rough day." "Hard?" Allison raised her voice. "Have you ever asked how my day is? I'm not your furniture, James." "I asked," he said, turning around. "You're the one starting a fight out of nothing." "Out of nothing," Allison slammed her palm down on the table. "You're always in your office somewhere with reports. I'm the one carrying all this stuff around the house. Sophie, work." James's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her about the accusations, but he knew it would be a disaster. Instead, he said, "I'm trying, Ollie. Please don't start." At that moment, Sophie came down to the kitchen, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. "Are you yelling again?" she said, opening the refrigerator. "Mom, I heard you from the stairs." "None of your business," Allison snapped. "Go do your homework." "Yeah, right," Sophie said, taking the milk. "You're always snapping at everyone. Maybe you should leave me alone." "Sophie, stop," James said, raising his hand. "Don't be rude to your mother." "Why me?" Sophie rolled her eyes. "She started it, always yelling at me." "Because you don't listen," Allison said, stepping towards her. "Mom," Sophie slammed the refrigerator door. "You're always picky." "Enough," James barked. "Both of you, shut up. Sophie, go upstairs. Ollie, calm down." Sophie snorted and walked away. Allison looked at James, her eyes gleaming with anger. "Great," she said. "Now you're on her side, as always." "I'm not on anyone's side," James said, rubbing his temples. "I just want you to stop yelling." Allison turned away, sorting through the papers in her bag. "You're never on my side," she muttered. "You sit there, saying nothing, like I don't care." James didn't answer. He walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. His thoughts turned to Ryan. Last week, Ryan had pitched Richard his budget optimization idea, trying to get past James. If he found out James had been suspended, he would take his chance. James clenched his fists. He needed to talk to David and find a way to get back into the office. Allison walked into the living room holding the phone. "I'm ordering pizza," she said, not looking at him. or are you going to keep quiet and eat alone again? Order, James said. Pepperoni, as usual. She nodded and began dialing. James looked at her, feeling the distance between them growing. He wanted to say something to ease the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he picked up the remote and turned on the TV, putting on the sports channel. Sophie came down half an hour later with the pizza already on the table. I won't eat, she said as she passed. I have a workout tomorrow. I don't want to gain weight. Sophie, sit down, Allison said, opening the box. You can't live on apples. I can, Sophie snapped. Oh my God, Sophie, Allison said, throwing a slice of pizza onto her plate. Why are you always like this? Because you're always butting in, Sophie said, stopping. Dad, tell her to back off. Eat your pizza, Sophie, James said without looking up. And stop arguing. Sophie rolled her eyes and went upstairs. Allison looked at James. You see, she said, she's not listening to me, and you're sitting there not saying anything. Hey, I'm tired, James said, taking a bite of his pizza. Let's just eat. Allison pushed her plate away. You're always tired, she said quietly. Something's wrong, James. You've been so jumpy all day. What are you hiding? Nothing, he said, shrugging. Just work. Lots of stuff. Work? Allison narrowed her eyes. You never come home early. What happened? I told you it's nothing, James said, getting up from the table. Finish eating, I'll clean up. He picked up the box and went into the kitchen. Allison watched him go, but didn't continue. James washed his hands and returned to the living room, turning up the volume on the TV. James Walker woke up at 7 and the sun was streaming through the blinds, illuminating the wedding photo on the dresser. He lay staring at the ceiling until Allison's alarm went off. She stretched, turned it off, and sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. Are you getting up? Allison asked, not looking at him. I'm up, James said, throwing back the covers. His voice was hoarse. He hadn't had a sleepless night, with thoughts of Caitlin and Linda and the fake texts swirling around in his head. He was supposed to meet David Lester, the lawyer, at 9 this morning. Allison stood up, put on her robe, and went into the bathroom. James heard her turn on the shower. He went down to the kitchen, put on the coffee maker, and got out a box of cereal. Sophie, his 16-year-old daughter, was still asleep. Her basketball practice started at 8. The house was quiet, but the tension of the previous evening Allison and Sophie's fight, her accusations of his distance, was heavy in the air. James poured himself some coffee and sat down at the table. He pulled out his phone to check his email, but there was only a reminder from David's office, 9 o'clock. Don't be late. James sipped his coffee, trying to collect his thoughts. He should have told Allison about the accusations, but she had already noticed his concern yesterday, and he had waved her off. If he told her now, she would explode. Better to wait until David gave him some clarity. At 7:30, Sophie came downstairs, wearing her basketball uniform and carrying a backpack. Dad, can you give me a ride? She asked, grabbing a banana from the table. Coach said to be early. Sure, James said, standing up. Eat something. No time, Sophie said, heading for the door. Where's Mom? In the shower, James replied, taking the keys. Let's go. He drove Sophie to school, parking the car outside the gym. Good luck with practice, he said as she opened the door. Thank you, Dad, Sophie said, smiling. You seem a little sad today. Is everything okay? It's fine, James lied. Go ahead, don't be late. Sophie nodded and ran out. James watched her disappear through the door, feeling a pang of guilt. She always noticed when he was out of sorts, unlike Allison. He was home by 8 o'clock. Allison had already left for work, leaving a note, I'll be back at 4. Buy some chicken for dinner. James crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. He got ready and drove to David's office in downtown Chicago. The meeting lasted an hour. David explained that Pinnacle Financial's department had begun reviewing the messages and advised him not to contact his colleagues. James nodded, but the thought of who might have set him up did not go away. Having discussed everything, he returned home at 10:30, parked the car in the garage, and walked into the house. The silence was oppressive. He turned on the TV, but the sports channel did not distract him. James lay down on the couch, closing his eyes, but the image of Caitlin fiddling with her skirt remained in his mind. At 3:45 p.m., the front door slammed. Sophie walked in, dropping her backpack by the stairs. "Dad, are you home?" she called, walking into the kitchen. "Here," James replied, sitting down on the sofa. "How's school?" "It's fine," Sophie said, opening the fridge. "The chemistry teacher was a pain in the ass, but I passed the test. Where's Mom?" "At work," James said. "He'll be back soon." "Okay," Sophie said, taking the yogurt. "I'm going upstairs to do my homework." She left, leaving James in the living room. He picked up the phone to call Richard Hayes, his boss, but decided against it. Richard had said to call tomorrow, and it was too risky to try any earlier. James went into the kitchen, took the chicken out of the freezer, and put it out to defrost. He had to keep his cool so that Allison wouldn't suspect anything. At 4:15, Allison walked into the house, carrying a bag of papers. Her face was red, her eyes were shining. She dropped the bag on the floor and stood in the doorway of the living room, crossing her arms. "James, what the hell?" she said, her voice shaking. "Linda Harris called. Said you were suspended for harassment. Is that true?" James froze, his heart pounding. "Ollie, calm down," he said, standing up. "It's not true. Someone set me up." "Framed?" Allison stepped closer, her voice growing louder. "Linda said the secretary filed a complaint. They have messages, James. What do you mean? Framed?" "I didn't do anything," James said, holding up his hands. "The messages are fake. I don't know who it is, but I'll figure it out." "Fake?" Allison laughed, but it was an evil laugh. "Are you serious? You think I'll believe you? You're always at work. You come home late. Maybe you really were flirting with her." "Ollie, I swear," James said, trying to keep his voice level. "I'm not even talking to this Caitlin. It's a lie." "Then why is everyone talking about it?" Allison shouted, her face turning even redder. "Linda works in your office," she heard her coworkers whispering. "This isn't just a rumor." "That's what the rumors are," James said, stepping toward her. "HR is checking. I hired a lawyer. Give me time." "Time?" Allison slammed her fist on the wall. At that moment, Sophie came down the stairs, wearing headphones. She took them off when she heard the screams. "What's that noise?" she asked, stopping. "Are you arguing again?" "Sophie, go upstairs," Allison said, not looking at her. "It's none of your business." "No way," Sophie said, stepping into the living room. "What's going on? Dad, why is she yelling again?" James sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sophie, this is adult business. Go to your homework." "Don't lie," Sophie said, crossing her arms. "I heard Mom say something about harassment. Is that true?" Allison turned to her. "Yes, it's true. Your father got caught with the secretary, and now he's suspended." "That's a lie," James said, looking at Sophie. "I didn't do anything. Someone fabricated the messages to frame me." Sophie looked at him, then at Allison. "I trust Dad," she said firmly. "He's not like that." "Oh, of course," Allison snapped. "You're always on his side. Do you think I'm stupid?" "Mom, you're always yelling," Sophie said, raising her voice. "Can't you at least listen to him?" "Don't you dare talk to me like that," Allison shouted, stepping towards her. "Go to your room." "That's enough," James said, stepping between them. "Ollie, calm down. Sophie, don't be rude. I'll handle this." "You'll figure it out?" Allison turned to him, her eyes filling with tears. "You destroyed our family, James. I don't want to see you. Get out!" James froze, her words like a slap in the face. He wanted to answer, but he knew it was useless. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'm going for a walk." James Walker woke up at 6:30 am on the living room couch of his Evanston home. He hadn't gone into the bedroom after an argument with Allison the night before. Her words, "I don't want to see you," echoed in his head. He rubbed his temples, feeling the fatigue weighing on his shoulders. Today, he was supposed to meet with David Lester, the lawyer, to deal with Caitlin's accusations. James stood up, folded the blanket, and walked into the kitchen. The coffee maker was untouched, and on the table was a note from Allison. "I'm at work. Sophie is at school. Don't call." He clenched the note in his fist and threw it into the trash. James turned on the coffee maker and pulled out his phone. No new messages, just yesterday's reminder from David's office, 9 o'clock. "Bring the phones." He poured coffee and sat at the table, looking at Sophie's basketball, forgotten by the door. Yesterday, she had sided with him, saying, "I trust Dad." It was the only bright spot in this nightmare. But Allison, who had learned of the complaint through her friend Linda, had already passed judgment. James sipped his coffee, trying to concentrate. He had to prove the messages were fake and get back to the office before someone else took his place. At 7:45, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Sophie, wearing her school uniform and carrying a backpack, came into the kitchen. "Dad, you're up," she said, picking up an apple from the table. "Where's Mom?" "Gone to work," James replied, putting his mug in the sink. "Want me to drive you to school?" "No need," Sophie said with a shrug. "The bus is in 10 minutes. Are you okay?" "I'll handle it," James said, forcing a smile. "Don't worry. Focus on school." "I'm not worried," Sophie said, looking at him. "I know it's not your fault. That secretary is lying." "Thank you, Sophie," James said, feeling warmth in his chest. "But keep it to yourself, okay? Don't tell anyone." "Okay," Sophie said, heading for the door. "I'll see you tonight." She left, slamming the door. James looked at his watch. It was time to go to David's. He took a shower, put on a shirt and trousers, took his work and personal phones, and went out to the car. David's office was on the 6th floor of a glass building. James walked into the reception area at 8:55. The receptionist, a young woman with glasses, nodded to him. "Mr. Lester is expecting you," she said, pointing to the door. James walked in. David, a man with short gray hair and a dark blue suit, was sitting at his desk, leafing through a folder. "James, sit down," he said, closing the folder. "You look like you haven't slept." "And I haven't slept," James said, sitting up. "Allison found out yesterday. Her friend, Linda, works in our office. She heard rumors." "Damn," David said, frowning. "This is bad. The last thing we need is rumors. Did you tell Allison the truth?" "I tried," James said, rubbing his neck. "She didn't believe me. She screamed that I had brought shame on the family. Sophie, my daughter, is on my side, but it doesn't help." "I'm so sorry," David said, opening his laptop. "But let's get down to business. Did you bring the phones?" James put his work and personal phones on the table. "Here, I didn't touch anything, like you said." "Okay," David said, plugging his work phone into his computer. "Let's get this straight. Caitlin claims you sent her messages. HR gave me copies of the printouts you saw. They look convincing, but there's one thing I noticed." "What?" James asked, leaning forward. "It's preliminary," David said, opening the file on the screen. "But the timestamps on the messages are odd. They're supposedly from your work number, but on one of them, according to your calendar, you were in a meeting with Richard Hayes. You couldn't have been texting at that time." "So it's a fake?" James asked, his voice brightening. "Probably," David said. "Tampering with evidence is serious business. Under federal law, 18 Section 1001, tampering with evidence is a felony. If we can prove the messages were fabricated, Caitlin and whoever helped her could go to jail. But we need proof." "How do we find them?" James asked, gripping the arms of his chair. "I've asked HR for access to the server logs," David said. "They're required to provide the data under Title Roman 7 to investigate the complaint. We'll check what device the messages were sent from and whether there's any evidence of editing. I've also hired an IT specialist to analyze your phone. It'll take a couple of days. What if they don't find anything? James asked, his voice dropping. That'll be tough, David said, looking him in the eye. But we have some discrepancies in the tags, and that's something. Don't talk to Caitlin, HR, or your coworkers yet, and keep Allison in the loop as much as you can. She could be a problem if word gets out. She's already a problem, James said, leaning back. She kicked me out of the house yesterday. Hang in there, David said, closing his laptop. I'll call you as soon as I have news. Leave your phones, we'll check them. James nodded, stood up, and walked out. Outside, he got into his car and looked at his watch. 10:30 am. He wanted to call Richard, but David forbade it. Instead, he drove home, feeling a glimmer of hope. If David was right, the inconsistencies in the messages might save him. Allison Walker sat in her office at Evanston High School, flipping through reports. It was 11 am, but she couldn't concentrate. The call from Linda Harris the previous day had changed everything. Linda, who worked in the marketing department at Pinnacle Financial, said, Allison, I heard James got suspended. Some secretary filed a harassment complaint. Everyone's whispering. Allison could still feel her blood boiling. She had yelled at James before he could explain. Now she didn't know what to think. What if he was right? But the messages, Linda had said they seemed real. Allison took out her phone and dialed Linda. Linda, it's me, she said when Linda answered. What else have you heard about James? Nothing new, Linda said, lowering her voice. Everyone in the office is buzzing, but no one knows for sure. They say HR is digging. Have you talked to him? Yeah, Allison said, clutching the phone. He swears it's a setup, but I don't know what to believe. Oh, honey, Linda said. I'd keep my eyes peeled if I were you. That's how men are. But if he's innocent, HR will sort it out. Thank you, Allison said, and hung up. She looked at her watch. She had to pick Sophie up from school and take her to her mother, Margaret. After the fight last night, she didn't want to leave Sophie at home with James. Let her stay with her grandmother until things calmed down. At 3:30, Allison parked her Honda Accord outside the school. Sophie came out, wearing her basketball uniform and carrying a backpack. Mom, why did you come? She asked, getting into the car. I would have taken the bus. We're going to Grandma's, Allison said, starting the engine. You'll stay with her for a couple of days. What? Sophie frowned. Why? Because of Dad? Don't start, Allison said as she pulled out onto the road. I need time to sort this out. Sort it out. Sophie raised her voice. You yelled at him yesterday without even listening. Sophie, it's none of your business, Allison said, gripping the steering wheel. You don't understand. I know you're not giving him a chance, Sophie said, crossing her arms. He's not what you think. That's enough, Allison snapped. You're going to your grandmother's, period. Sophie snorted and put on her headphones. They drove in silence to Margaret's house, 10 minutes from the school. Margaret, a tall woman with short gray hair, opened the door. Allison, Sophie, come in, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Thanks for taking her in, Mom, Allison said, setting Sophie's bag down in the hallway. I need a couple of days. Of course, Margaret said, looking at Sophie. What's going on there? Nothing, Sophie muttered, walking into the living room. Mom's just freaking out. Sophie, behave yourself, Allison said, but Sophie had already turned on the TV. Allison, talk to me, Margaret said, lowering her voice. What's wrong with James? You mentioned some scandal yesterday. Not now, Allison said, shaking her head. I don't know what to think. I'll talk to you tomorrow. She hugged her mother and left. In the car, Allison felt tears welling up. She didn't want to believe Linda, but doubts gnawed at her. She drove home, deciding that she wouldn't talk to James until he proved his case, justice. James returned home at 11:30 and he went into the kitchen, got a bottle of water, and sat down at the table. His phone vibrated. A message from David found another discrepancy. "I'll call you in the evening." James reread the text, feeling hope growing. Allison Walker stood at the kitchen sink. She had been awake half the night, running the same thoughts through her head. The argument with James on Wednesday, his silence, his nothing happened, all of it burned her inside. Allison put her mug in the sink and picked up her phone. She opened the conversation with Linda, rereading her latest message. "Allison, don't let him make a fool of you. You deserve better." Her fingers trembled. 15 years of marriage, and now what? Gossip in the office where Linda works, embarrassment in front of her colleagues. She dialed her friend's number. "Linda, it's me," Allison said when she answered. "I can't do this anymore." James was silent, as if he didn't care if he was sleeping in the living room. "Oh, honey," Linda said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "I told you he thinks you'll swallow it and shut up. That's how men are. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Allison said, her voice cracking. "I've yelled at him, and he just keeps saying it's a setup. But Linda, the messages, you said they were real." "I heard they were real," Linda said, lowering her voice. "Two of the salespeople were whispering in the cafeteria yesterday. You shouldn't sit there and cry. Do something, show him." "Show me?" Allison frowned, wiping away a tear. "How?" "Well," Linda giggled, "if he's cheating on you, why should you be a saint? Find someone, have fun. Let him know you're not his shadow." "Are you serious?" Allison asked, her heart pounding. "That's wrong." "Wrong?" Linda interrupted. "It's wrong that he embarrassed you. Remember that guy, the photographer you worked with? Matt, right?" "Matt Donovan," Allison said, her cheeks flushing. "We haven't spoken in years." "Write to him," Linda said, "just to chat. Then decide. You're beautiful, Allison. Don't sit there like a nun." Allison hung up, feeling her blood pounding in her temples. Matt was an art teacher at the school where she worked until 2020. They joked and flirted, but it never went any further. He was too carefree. Now he was a freelance photographer. His ex-posts flashed across her feed. Beaches, weddings, portraits. She opened his profile, found his number, and wrote, "Hi, Matt. This is Allison Walker. Long time no see. How are you?" She hit send and threw the phone on the table as if it had burned her hand. The answer came within 5 minutes. "Allison, I didn't expect that. I'm in Chicago shooting a wedding this weekend. What's up with you?" Allison reread the message, her anger at James flaring. She wrote, "Lots of things. Maybe we can meet tonight. Let's chat." Her fingers shook as she hit send. Matt replied a minute later, "Cool idea." Where and when? Allison looked at the empty kitchen. Sophie was at Margaret's. James was out. He'd left a note yesterday saying he'd be at the lawyer's until late. She wrote, "Come to me in Evanston. I'll send you the address." Matt sent, "Agreed. I'll bring the wine." Allison put her phone down, her heart pounding. She didn't know if she wanted to get back at James, feel wanted, or just numb the pain. She went into the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out the blue dress she hadn't worn since her and James's trip to New York 3 years ago. It still showed off her figure. Allison looked in the mirror, smoothed her brown hair, and took a deep breath. Linda was right, she could still attract women too. Allison drove to the school, held 4 consultations with students, but her thoughts were on Matt. She imagined James finding out, the way his face would contort. He deserved it, she thought, remembering his evasive answers. At 4 o'clock, she finished work and drove home. In the car, she called Margaret. "Mom, it's me," Allison said, turning onto her street. "Is Sophie okay?" "Yes," Margaret answered. "She's playing cards with the girl next door. She wants to stay until Sunday. What's going on with you?" "It's okay," Allison said, her voice sharp. "Just keep her, okay?" "Allison, are you sure you're okay?" Margaret asked. "You sound out of it." "I'm fine," Allison said and hung up. At home, she showered, put on a dress, and applied light makeup, mascara, lipstick, a little blush. At 6:45, she opened a bottle of red wine, poured 2 glasses, and set them on the coffee table in the living room. James's note was in the kitchen. at David's until the evening. I'll be back late. Allison crumpled it up and threw it away. Let her lawyer keep it, she thought, checking her phone. Matt wrote, I'm leaving. I'll be there at 7. At 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Allison opened the door. Matt Donovan stood there, wearing dark jeans and a gray shirt, holding a bottle of wine. His blonde hair was slightly tousled, his smile as charming as ever. Allison, he said, looking her over, you look amazing. Thank you, she said, smiling. Come in. Matt walked in, holding out the bottle. Merlot, your favorite, I believe, he said, looking around the living room. Cool house, cozy. We try, Allison said, setting his wine on the table. Let's open mine, to old friends. They clinked glasses. Matt told her about the shoot in California, about the drunk groom who dropped the cake. Allison laughed, feeling the tension release. After the second glass, she relaxed, her cheeks turning pink. What about you? Matt asked, leaning back on the couch. What's new with you? You're somehow not the same as before. Just a family matter, Allison said, looking into her glass. James, let's just say he was a disappointment. Seriously? Matt narrowed his eyes. You want to tell me? I don't want to, Allison said, putting down her glass. I want to forget, at least for the evening. She looked at him, and Matt understood. He moved closer, his hand on her shoulder. I can help, he said quietly, his voice soft. Allison didn't pull away. Anger at James, Linda's words, the pain, all mixed together. She leaned over and kissed him. Matt responded, his hands sliding around her waist. They stood without saying a word and walked into the bedroom. Allison closed the door, her heart pounding. She didn't think about the consequences, only that she wanted to fill the emptiness. They lay down on the bed, Allison's dress on the floor. Matt was gentle but firm, his touch silencing her thoughts. Allison closed her eyes, surrendering to the moment, her anger at James dissolving in every movement. When it was over, they lay side by side, their breathing calming. Allison stared at the ceiling, feeling a mixture of relief and vague guilt. That was. Matt said, turning to face her. I haven't felt that in a long time. Yeah, Allison said, pulling the covers up. I didn't expect it to turn out like this. Want me to open some more wine? Matt asked, smiling. Allison nodded. Go ahead, she said, sitting down. Get it from the living room. Matt stood up, put on his jeans, and went to get the bottle. Allison stayed in the bedroom, looking at the rumpled bed. She thought about James, about how he would look at her when he found out. Linda said it was fair. Matt returned with the wine and glasses, putting them on the nightstand. To us, he said, pouring, or to whatever you like. She took a sip, feeling the wine warm her. James Walker pulled his car into the driveway of his Evanston home at 8:45 p.m. His shirt was wrinkled from a day in the office of David Lester, the lawyer who had turned his life around. In his briefcase was a folder of documents that proved his innocence. A report from Pinnacle Financial's department showing that Caitlin's messages had been sent from a fake account, and emails in which she had arranged to file a complaint with Ryan Collins, a co-worker, for $5,000. James gripped the steering wheel, feeling a mix of relief and rage. He was in the clear, but the price had already been paid. Allison had thrown him out the day before, screaming that she didn't want to see him. He got out of the car, picked up his briefcase, and headed for the door. The lights were on in the living room, and an unfamiliar Toyota Corolla was parked in the driveway. James frowned. He opened the door and walked into the hallway. There were 2 glasses of wine on the coffee table, one half empty, and an open bottle next to it. Voices were coming from the bedroom, a woman's laughter and a deep man's voice. James froze, his heart pounding. He set his briefcase down and pulled out his phone. Quietly, trying not to break the floorboards, he walked to the bedroom. The door was ajar. He peered inside and felt the blood rush to his face. James turned on the recording on his phone, pointing the camera at the crack. "What the hell is this?" he said loudly, throwing the door open. Allison screamed. James, she said, jumping up. The man James didn't know him put down his glass and raised his hands. Hey, man, calm down, he said. I'm just visiting. Visiting? I see you feel at home. Have you made yourself comfortable? Excellent. And now the same trick, only in reverse order with the exit. Otherwise, I can't vouch for myself. I only closed one accusation, and you provoked me to a second. Matt, that was his name, apparently stood up, grabbing his shirt from the floor. Look, I don't want any trouble, he said. I'm leaving. No, stop, Allison said, grabbing his arm. She turned to James, her eyes flashing. This is your fault. You embarrassed me by getting involved with that secretary. Even the score. 1-1 James. James paused the recording, his hand shaking. He pocketed the phone and looked at her. 1-1, he said, his voice icy. No, Ollie. 1-0 and a rip-off. You win. He went to his briefcase in the hallway, pulled out a folder, and returned to the bedroom. Allison and Matt stood motionless. James threw the folder on the bed. Open it, he said. Read it. Allison frowned, picked up the folder, and opened it. Her eyes scanned the first page and its report with graphs and logs. What is this? She asked, her voice dropping. Proof, James said. The messages Caitlin showed HR weren't sent from my phone. They were from a fake account. And these, he pointed to the second page, are Caitlin's messages to Ryan Collins. He paid her $5,000 to file a complaint. That's bribery, Ollie. A federal felony. I'm cleared. Allison leafed through the papers, her face pale. Ryan, she muttered. Your colleague? Yes, James said. He wanted my job as vice president. He set me up, and you believed him. Instead of believing me, he gestured at Matt. Matt cleared his throat, buttoning his shirt. Look, I didn't know, he said. Shut up, James said, turning to him. Get dressed and get out of my house. James, wait, Allison said, stepping toward him. I didn't know. Linda said the messages were real. I was furious. Linda. James shook his head. You believed the gossip, not me. Almost 20 years, Ollie. And this is how it all ended. Matt grabbed his boots and headed for the door. I'm going, he muttered. No hard feelings, okay? Out, James barked, pointing towards the exit. Matt ran out of the bedroom, slamming the front door. Allison stood clutching the folder, her eyes filling with tears. James, I'm sorry, she said. I was wrong. Let's talk. Talk? James looked at her, his voice even, but inside he was seething. No, Ollie. We're done. I'm filing for divorce. Allison gasped, dropping the folder. The papers scattered across the floor. Divorce? She whispered. You can't. James, I didn't mean to. You wanted this, he said, stepping toward the door. You chose this. Pack your things and get out. I don't want you here. This is my house, Allison shouted, her voice breaking. You can't kick me out. Was yours, James said. But after what you did, he's mine. Go away, or I'll call the police. I have a video. Allison shook, her face twisting. You wouldn't dare, she said, but there was panic in her voice. Look at me, James said, looking into her eyes. I dare. Go. Now. Allison grabbed the dress from the chair, put it on over her robe, and ran into the hallway. She opened the closet, pulled out a bag, and began throwing clothes in. James stood in the bedroom doorway, his arms crossed. His heart was pounding, but he felt no pity. She had betrayed him by trusting Linda instead of him. Allison zipped up her bag, grabbed her keys, and turned to face him. You'll regret this, she said, her voice shaking. Sophie won't forgive you. Sophie will know the truth, James said. From you or from me. Choose. Allison sobbed and ran out of the house. Her car started, and the headlights disappeared into the darkness. James closed the door, feeling the silence pressing in. He walked into the living room, sat down on the couch, and pulled out his phone. The video was there, A minute and a half of Allison and Matt drinking wine in the bedroom. He didn't want to use it, but he knew he might need to. James picked up the folder from the floor, gathered up the papers, and placed them on the table. The IT report, the emails between Caitlin and Ryan, they were his ticket back to the office. David said HR had been notified and Ryan would be called in on Monday, but the victory felt hollow. Allison was gone, Sophie was at her grandmother's, the house was a stranger. He poured himself some water, sat down at the table, and looked at the wedding photo on the wall. He and Allison were smiling, holding hands. That was in the past now. James took out his phone and texted David. A surprise was waiting at home. Ollie cheated on me, showed the documents. Kicked Allison out. Divorce for sure. What's next? The answer came a minute later. This is total crap. Hold on. We'll discuss the divorce tomorrow. Rest. James leaned back in his chair, feeling tiredness creeping up on him. James Walker sat at the kitchen table in his house. It was 7:30 on a Monday, and the house felt strange without Allison and Sophie. Friday night had turned his life upside down. Now Allison was gone, probably to her mother or her friend Linda, and Sophie was staying with her grandmother, Margaret. James poured coffee but didn't drink it, staring at the empty mug. The documents he'd shown Allison, the IT report, and Caitlin's emails to Ryan lay on the table, a reminder of his victory and defeat. The phone vibrated. A message from Richard Hayes, his boss James, be in the office at 10 o'clock. Important. James reread the text, feeling his heart speed up. Richard knew about the investigation. David Lester, James's lawyer, had given HR the evidence on Friday, so this wasn't just talk. James wrote, "Will be." He stood up, put the mug in the sink, and went to get ready. At 8:30 he was ready. Navy suit, white shirt, briefcase with photocopied documents. He checked the mirror in the hallway, straightened his tie, and went out to the car. The Ford Explorer started on the first crank. James drove to downtown Chicago, to the Pinnacle financial offices, wondering what Richard would say. If Ryan was exposed, he could be fired. But what next? James gripped the wheel, remembering Ryan trying to steal his projects, smiling in meetings when he knew he had set him up. He parked outside the building at 9:45, walked through the lobby, and took the elevator to the 23rd floor. The office was buzzing with people typing, making calls, and talking. James noticed several colleagues go silent as he passed. Tom, standing by the coffee machine, nodded at him but looked away. The rumors that had started the previous Monday had clearly not died down. Maria, his assistant, looked up from her desk. "James," she said, smiling, "are you back?" "I don't know yet," James said, stopping. Richard called, "What's up?" "Everyone's whispering," Maria said, lowering her voice. "They say Ryan wasn't here today, and Linda Carter's been in Richard's office all day." "Got it," James said, feeling hope rising. "Wish me luck." "You can handle it," Maria said with a wink. James knocked on Richard's office door at 10 o'clock. "Come in," said a voice. He opened the door. Richard Hayes was sitting at his desk, his gray hair combed back, his suit impeccable. Across from him sat Linda Carter, the head of HR, holding a folder. Her face was tense. "James, sit down," Richard said, pointing to a chair. "It's good to see you." "Thank you," James said, sitting down. He placed his briefcase on his lap, ready to retrieve documents if necessary. Richard leaned back in his chair. "Straight to the point," he said. "We've completed our investigation of your case. Linda, tell us." Linda opened the folder. "James," she said, her voice businesslike, "it reviewed the messages Caitlin Moore submitted as evidence. They were not sent from your phone, but from a fake account created through a third-party service. Your attorney, Mr. Lester, provided correspondence between Caitlin and Ryan Collins. She confirmed that he paid her $5,000 to file a complaint." James nodded, his face calm, but inside he was jubilant. "I knew it was a setup," he said. "Ryan's been after me for a long time." "Exactly," Richard said, frowning. "This isn't just an ethics violation. Bribery and evidence tampering are federal felonies, 18 Section 201 and Section 1001. We've notified the police, but within the company, Ryan Collins is terminated as of today. Fired? James asked, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He was here? No, Linda said. We called him Friday night, after your lawyer turned over the evidence. He tried to deny it, but Caitlin confessed. She's fired too, and may face trial. Got it, James said, clutching his briefcase. What about my suspension? It's off, Richard said, smiling for the first time. You're back to work immediately, but that's not all. He picked up a piece of paper from the table. Your Q3 reports and this year's projects are the best in the department. We were planning to promote you to VP even before all this happened. Now that the truth has come out, I'm happy to announce that, effective immediately, you're VP of Finance. James froze, his throat tightening. Seriously, he said, not believing his ears. Absolutely, Richard said, extending his hand. Congratulations, James. You've earned it. James shook his hand, feeling warmth spread through his chest. Thank you, Richard, he said. I didn't expect that. You've proven that we were right about you, Richard said. Linda, is there anything else to add? Just one thing, Linda said, closing the folder. James, we apologize for the inconvenience. Title Roman 7 policy requires suspension during an investigation, but we're glad the truth has prevailed. Thank you, James said, nodding. I appreciate your work. Go and get settled, Richard said, standing up. Your new office is on the 25th floor. Maria will help you move your things. James walked out of the office, his feet barely touching the floor. He walked to his old desk, where Maria was sorting through paperwork. Well, she asked, looking up. I'm back, James said, smiling, and now I'm vice president. Wow, Maria jumped up, hugging him. Congratulations. What about Ryan? Fired, James said, lowering his voice. He bribed Caitlin. It's all out. Fair enough, said Maria, shaking her head. That bastard has been asking for it for a long time. James gathered his things, his laptop, a few folders, and with Maria's helped move them into his new office. A spacious room with a view of Chicago, a leather chair, a dark wood desk. He sat down, ran his hand over the tabletop, and felt pride mingle with emptiness. He had won, but silence awaited him at home. At 3 p.m., he returned to Evanston. The house was empty, as it had been that morning. James walked into the kitchen, got a bottle of water, and sat down at the table. He wrote to Sophie, Hi, how are you? We need to talk. The answer came within a minute, at Grandma's. Everything is okay. When should I come? James wrote tomorrow. I'll pick you up. He didn't mention the divorce that had to be said in person. Then he called David Lester. David, it's James, he said when he replied, Ryan got fired. I got promoted. Excellent, David said. Congratulations. The evidence worked. What about Allison? Gone, James said, his voice dropping. I announced the divorce. What now? We'll get the paperwork done, David said. In Illinois, divorce takes 6 to 12 months. Custody of Sophie will be an issue. She's 16. The court will take her opinion into account. Come tomorrow, we'll get started. Okay, James said. Thank you. James Walker pulled into a parking spot outside Margaret's house in Evanston. It was a warm Tuesday, and the smell of mown grass filled the air. He got out of the car, straightened his shirt, and headed for the door. Today, he wanted to pick her up and tell her what was going on, but without the details of Friday night. James rang the doorbell. Allison's mother, Margaret, answered, her gray hair pulled back into a neat bun. James, come in, she said, stepping back. Sophie's in the sitting room. Thank you, Allison, he said, coming in. Is she okay? She's angry, Margaret said, lowering her voice. Allison was here yesterday trying to talk to her, but Sophie won't. What's going on? It's a long story, James said, shaking his head. I'll figure it out. Where's Allison? She went to stay with us, Margaret said, frowning. She said you two had broken up. James, what have you done? Not me, he said, his voice even. Talk to her. I've come for Sophie. Margaret sighed and pointed toward the living room. James walked in. Sophie was sitting on the couch, wearing a basketball jersey, scrolling through her phone. Her backpack was lying next to her. Dad, she said, jumping up. Finally, I'm ready to go home. Hey, James said, smiling. Get ready. We'll talk in the car. Sophie nodded, grabbed her backpack, and hugged Margaret. Thank you, Grandma, she said. I'll call. Behave yourself, Margaret said, patting her on the shoulder. And don't hold a grudge against your mother. Sophie snorted but said nothing. James and Sophie walked out to the car, got in, and he started the engine. How are you? He asked as he pulled out onto the road. It's fine, Sophie said, looking out the window. Grandma's great, but I'm tired of sitting there. Mom came yesterday. She yelled again that it was all your fault. James gripped the steering wheel. What did she say? He asked. That you betrayed her, Sophie said, turning to him. But I know that's not true. You said you were set up, and I believe you. What really happened? James took a deep breath. He didn't want to talk about Matt and the video, but Sophie deserved the truth, at least part of it. I was accused of harassment at work, he said. It was a lie. My coworker, Ryan, bribed his secretary to file a complaint. I proved he was innocent, he was fired, and I was promoted to vice president. Cool, Sophie said, her eyes lighting up. Congratulations, Dad. What's wrong with Mom? Why is she so angry? We broke up, James said, his voice falling. I filed for divorce. She didn't believe me, and it went too far. She was with another man. Sophie fell silent, looking down at her sneakers. I'm staying with you. James looked at her, feeling warmth in his chest. Are you sure? He asked. It's your choice, but it's a serious one. I'm sure, Sophie said, her voice firm. Okay, James said, turning toward the house. Then you live with me. But if you change your mind, tell me, I love you very much, and I told you everything because you need to know the truth, but I'm not going to turn you against your mother. They walked into the house. James put Sophie's backpack in the hallway. Want some pizza? He asked, opening the refrigerator. Or should we get Chinese? Pizza, Sophie said, sitting down at the table. Pepperoni? Dad, I'll text Mom. Be careful, James said as he dialed the pizzeria's number. Don't text in anger. Think. I'll think about it, Sophie said, taking out her laptop. But she needs to know. James ordered a pizza and sat down across from her. He watched Sophie type, her face intent. He wanted to stop her, but he knew it was her right. An hour later, when the pizza was gone, Sophie turned her laptop toward him. Read it, she said. I want you to see it. James picked up the laptop. The letter was open in a text editor. Mom, I don't want to talk to you, and here's why. You betrayed Dad. I know he filed for divorce, and I don't blame him. You only think about yourself. I'm staying with Dad. Don't write or call until I'm ready. Sophie. James reread it, his throat tightening. Sophie, that's harsh, he said. Are you sure you want to send it? Yes, Sophie said, her eyes shining. She needs to know what she's done. Okay, James said, handing the laptop back. It's your decision, but if she answers, give her a chance. Sophie nodded and hit send. She closed her laptop and stood up. I'm going to shower, she said. Thanks for not making me be with her. You're my daughter, James said, smiling. I'm for you. Sophie went upstairs and James remained at the table. He took out his phone and wrote to David Lester, Sophie wants to live with me. How can this be formalized? David replied, in Illinois, the court will consider her opinion at 16. We'll add it to the divorce papers. I'll see you tomorrow. James nodded, putting his phone away. He felt relieved, but also worried Sophie had chosen him, but the break with Allison was final. Allison Walker sat in the guest room of her mother's Evanston home. Her things, 2 bags of clothes and a box of books, were stacked against the wall. Allison opened her laptop, checking her email. Among the spam was an email from Sophie. She clicked it, and her heart sank. After she read it, she covered her face with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophie hated her, choosing James, accusing her of betraying her. Allison wanted to write back, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she dialed Linda's number. "Linda, it's me," she said when she answered. "Sophie wrote to me. She doesn't want to see me. I don't know what to do." "Oh, Allison," Linda said, but her voice was cold. "I told you, take it slow. You did something stupid with that guy, and now Sophie is angry. Give her time." "You said it was fair," Allison said, her voice breaking. "You pushed me towards Matt." "I said have fun," Linda said, irritated. "Not sleeping with him in your bedroom. Look, I have to work. Call me later." Linda hung up. Allison threw the phone on the bed, feeling the loneliness tightening in her chest. She called another friend, Sarah, but she didn't answer. Another, Katie, was polite but evasive. "Allison, I'm busy. Let's do it next week." Margaret walked into the room holding a mug of tea. "Allison, what's wrong?" she asked, sitting down on the bed. "You've been crying all day." "Sophie hates me," Allison said, wiping her eyes. "She wrote that she was staying with James, and my friends, they're turning away." "You made a mistake," Margaret said, her voice stern but gentle. "But you're my daughter. Stay here as long as you need to. And with Sophie, give her time." Allison nodded, but there was an emptiness inside. She had lost her husband, her daughter, and her friends. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, and realized she would have to start over. James and Sophie were eating dinner in the living room while watching a basketball game. Sophie was laughing as she told him how she had beaten her friend in practice. James looked at her, feeling like he could breathe for the first time in a week. James Walker sat in David Lester's office. "James," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I've prepared the divorce petition. In Illinois, the process takes 6 to 12 months, but we can speed it up if Allison doesn't contest it. Are you asking for full custody of Sophie?" "Yes," James said, crossing his arms. "She wants to live with me." "Got it," David said, making a note. "Under the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act, courts take into account the views of minors over the age of 14, so Sophie's choice is in your favor. But the judge can grant temporary joint custody until he figures it out. Has Allison hired a lawyer?" "I don't know," James said, rubbing his neck. "She's with her mother, Margaret. Sophie said Allison tried to talk to her, but she refused." "Okay," David said, opening his laptop. "We'll file today. I've listed your arguments: Allison's infidelity, her emotional instability, Sophie's choice. Is there evidence of infidelity?" "The video," James said, his voice level. "I took it with that guy Matt in our bedroom, but I don't want to use it unless I have to." "Keep it," David said, writing it down. "In Illinois, adultery doesn't affect property division, but it could play a role in custody if we can prove it's harmful to Sophie. I'm setting up a hearing next week. Be prepared." "Thank you," James said, standing up. "Keep me posted." He left the office, got into his car, and drove home to Evanston. David's words were running through his head: temporary joint custody. He didn't want Sophie to be forced to see Allison, but the law was the law. At home, he found Sophie in the living room watching a basketball game on TV. "Dad, where have you been?" she asked, looking up from the screen. Her backpack was lying by the couch. Her sneakers were on the floor. "At the lawyer's," James said, sitting down next to her. "I filed for divorce, and I asked you to live with me." "Cool," Sophie said, smiling. "Mom called this morning. I didn't answer. She said she wanted to meet, but I didn't want to." "Are you sure?" James asked, looking at her. "She's your mother. Maybe we should listen." "No," Sophie said, crossing her arms. James nodded, feeling proud of her determination, but also uneasy. "Okay," he said, "but if you change your mind, just tell me. I won't force you." "I won't change my mind," Sophie said, turning back to the TV. "Order a pizza, will you?" James smiled, pulled out his phone, and ordered a pepperoni. He looked at Sophie, wondering how he could protect her from the pain of divorce. But she was stronger than he expected. Allison Walker sat in the guest room of her mother's Evanston home on Friday afternoon, June 6th. Her laptop was open on the table, a cold cup of tea next to her. Sophie's email from Tuesday still stung. "You betrayed Dad. I'm staying with him." Allison tried calling, texting, but Sophie ignored her. Yesterday, she learned from her lawyer that James had filed for divorce, asking for full custody. Her world was falling apart, and no one was reaching out. Allison dialed Sophie's number, but the call went to voicemail. She wrote, "Sophie, please talk to me. I know I made a mistake, but I'm your mother. Give me a chance." There was no answer. Allison threw the phone on the bed and covered her face with her hands. She remembered Friday Matt, the wine, James with the phone. His words, "I am filing for divorce." She had trusted Linda, not him, and now she was paying the price. Margaret came in holding a plate of sandwiches. "Allison, eat," she said, putting the plate on the table. "You haven't eaten anything since this morning." "I don't want to," Allison said, wiping her eyes. "Sophie hates me. James wants to take her away. I've lost everything." "Not all," Margaret said, sitting down next to him. "You made a mistake, but you can fix it. Talk to Sophie. Not over the phone, go to her." "She won't open the door," Allison said, her voice shaking. "I've tried. She won't even look at me." "Then give her time," Margaret said, putting her hand on her shoulder. "But don't give up. She's your daughter." On Monday, June 9th, James and Sophie sat in a Cook County courtroom in Chicago. The divorce and custody hearing began at 10 a.m. James wore a navy suit, Sophie jeans, and a school t-shirt. David Lester sat next to him, holding a folder of papers. Across from him was Allison in a gray dress with her lawyer, a woman in her 40s. Her face was pale, her eyes red. Sophie looked at the floor, avoiding her gaze. Judge Karen Evans, a woman with short dark hair, walked into the courtroom. "The case is Walker v. Walker," she said, opening a file. "A petition for divorce and custody of a minor, Sophie Walker. Mr. Lester, you have the floor." David stood up. "Your Honor," he said, "my client, James Walker, files for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. He seeks full custody of Sophie, age 16, who has expressed a desire to live with him. Miss Walker has committed adultery, as evidenced by video evidence, and her behavior has caused Sophie emotional distress." Allison's attorney, Miss Rogers, objected. "Your Honor," she said, "my client acknowledges her mistake, but she wants to maintain her connection with her daughter. Allison Walker is a school psychologist, a stable parent. She is asking for joint custody to restore her relationship with Sophie." The judge looked at Sophie. "Sophie," she said, "you can speak up. Who do you want to live with?" Sophie stood up, her voice firm. "With Dad," she said. "He was always there for me. Mom, she betrayed us. I don't want to talk to her." Allison gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. James placed his hand on Sophie's shoulder, feeling both pride and pain. The judge nodded, writing down. "I'll take your opinion into account, Sophie," she said. "But the law requires that the interests of all parties be considered. Mr. Walker, Miss Walker, you both love your daughter, but your conflict is hurting her. Pursuant to 750 Ilks 5602. 5. I award temporary joint custody. Sophie will live with her father, but her mother will have visitation rights 1 day off a week, beginning Saturday. The next hearing is in 3 months. Case dismissed." Allison stood up, her voice shaking. "Sophie, please," she said, stepping toward her. "Talk to me. I love you." Sophie turned away, clinging to James. "Come on, Dad," she said, ignoring her mother. James hugged her and walked out of the room without looking at Allison. David walked beside him. "Temporary custody is fine," he said. "Sophie made her point. It's in our favor. But be prepared, Allison can fight." "Let her," James said, opening the car door. Sophie made her choice. They drove home. Sophie turned on the radio, humming along to a pop song. James looked at her, sensing that they could make it. But Allison's look in court, full of pain and pleading, was etched in his memory. Allison walked back to Margaret, her hands shaking. She walked into the guest room, dropped her bag, and sat on the bed. The judge had given her permission to see Sophie, but her daughter didn't even look at her. Allison opened her laptop, reread Sophie's letter, and wrote a reply. "Sophie, I know you're angry. I made a mistake, but I want to make it right. Please give me a chance. I love you." She hit send, but knew there would be no response. Margaret came in holding tea. "Allison, what did the judge say?" she asked. "Temporary joint custody," Allison said, wiping away tears. "But Sophie hates me. I don't know how to move on." "Live," Margaret said, sitting down next to her. "Fight for her. You're stronger than you think." Allison nodded. Allison picked up her phone and pulled up the website of a Chicago-based psychology practice. She knew she needed help not as a school counselor, but as someone who had lost her family. She made an appointment with Dr. Laura Miller, a highly reviewed psychologist. For 10 a.m. Allison got up, put on jeans and a sweater, grabbed an umbrella, and walked out to her Honda Accord. The rain was getting heavier, but she didn't want to cancel. This was her chance to figure herself out. Dr. Miller's office was in a small brick building in downtown Evanston. Allison walked in at 9:55, shaking water off her umbrella. Laura Miller, a woman with short dark hair and a warm smile, greeted her in an office with a sofa and a bookcase. "Miss Walker, sit down," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Tell me what brings you here." Allison sat up, clutching her bag. "I lost my family," she said, her voice shaking. "My husband, James, filed for divorce. My daughter, Sophie, won't see me. I made a terrible mistake." "What mistake?" Laura asked, making a note in her notebook. Allison took a deep breath. "I thought he was cheating on me," she said. "He was accused of harassment at work. My friend Linda said it was true. I was furious and slept with another man. James caught us, proved the accusations were false, and threw me out. Sophie found out, and now she hates me." Laura nodded, her gaze calm. "You feel guilty," she said. "That's understandable. But why did you trust your friend and not your husband?" "I don't know," Allison said, wiping away tears. "I was always jealous. He worked a lot, came home late. Linda added fuel to the fire. I wanted revenge, but I ruined everything." "You made your choice out of emotion," Laura said. "Now it's important to figure out what you want. Your family back, your connection with Sophie." "Sophie," Allison said, her voice growing stronger. "She's my daughter. I want her to forgive me." "It's possible," Laura said, "but it will take time. Sophie is 16 and angry. Start small, write her letters without asking for an answer. Show that you are changing, and keep working on yourself. Let's meet once a week." Allison nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. She left the office at 11 o'clock, got into her car, and wrote Sophie a message on her phone. "Sophie, I know you don't want to see me, and I deserve it. I was wrong to believe the rumors instead of Dad. I'm seeing a psychologist to become a better person. I love you, and I'll always wait for you. Mom." She hit send and drove to Margaret's house. Sophie Walker sat in her room in James's Evanston home on the evening of Thursday, June 12th. Her laptop was open on her bed, a basketball next to her. She had just returned from practice, where she had hit the game-winning shot, but her joy was marred by the email from Allison that had arrived that morning. Sophie had read it 3 times, but had not responded. She was still angry. Her mother had betrayed her father by trusting Linda and had destroyed the family. But the reference to the therapist had stung. Maybe Allison was trying. James knocked on the door. "Sophie, dinner's ready," he said, peering in. spaghetti and meatballs. I'm coming, Sophie said, closing her laptop. She went down to the kitchen where James was putting away food. Dad, Mom wrote again, she said, sitting down at the table. What does he say? James asked, placing the plate in front of her. That she goes to a psychologist, Sophie said, twirling her fork. She asks for forgiveness, but I don't believe her. James sat down opposite. She's your mother, he said. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but maybe I should answer. The judge gave her permission to see you. She can come on Saturday. I don't want to, Sophie said, pushing her plate away. She ruined everything. Why should I? You shouldn't, James said, looking into her eyes. But you might regret it if you don't give her a chance. Think about it. Sophie nodded, but her face remained stubborn. After dinner, she returned to her room, opened her laptop, and reread the letter. She wanted to erase it, but instead began writing a reply. Mom, I read your letter. I'm still angry. You betrayed Dad, and it hurts me. If you really want to fix everything, prove it. Don't call or come over until I tell you to. And don't expect me to forgive you quickly. Sophie. She hit send, closed her laptop, and lay down on her bed, feeling relieved but also anxious. Allison returned to Margaret's house at 6 p.m. Margaret was cooking dinner chicken and potatoes. How was the session? She asked, chopping vegetables. It's hard, Allison said, setting her bag down in the hallway. But Laura says I can get Sophie back if I work on myself. I wrote to her today. Good girl, Margaret said, smiling. Don't give up. She's as stubborn as you were at her age. Allison nodded and walked into the guest room. She opened her laptop, checking her email. Among the spam was an email from Sophie. Allison gasped as she clicked on it. As she read it, she felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophie had written back, but her terms were strict. No calls, no meetings, just proof. Allison closed her laptop, wiped her eyes, and smiled for the first time in a week. It was a small step, but a step forward. She took a notebook and began to write a new letter. Sophie, thank you for answering. I will accept your conditions. I will work on myself and wait for you to be ready. Love you. Mom. She didn't send it, deciding to wait as Laura had advised. Allison lay down on her bed, feeling hope returning. James was sitting in his office at Pinnacle Financial on Monday, June 16th, checking the books. His new job as vice president required more time, but he was getting by. At 3 p.m., he received a text from Sophie. Mom wrote again. I answered, but told her not to interfere. Is that okay? James wrote. You're doing great. Decide for yourself. I'll support you. He smiled, proud of her strength. That evening, he and Sophie ate pizza for dinner while watching a basketball game. Dad, if Mom really changes, should I forgive her? Sophie asked, taking a bite. You shouldn't, James said, putting down his plate. But if you want, I don't mind. She's your mother. Sophie nodded, looking at the screen. James looked at her, thinking that they could handle it, even if Allison came back into their lives. But for now, he was her rock, and that was enough. Allison sat in Laura Miller's office on Tuesday, June 17th, talking about Sophie's letter. She responded, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. It's not much, but it's a start. That's a huge step, Laura said, smiling. Sophie gave you a chance. Keep writing, respect her boundaries. You're on the right track. James Walker stood in the living room of his new house in Evanston. The two-story house, with gray siding and a large backyard, was smaller than his old home but cozier. Boxes of stuff were piled against the wall he and Sophie had moved in yesterday, leaving behind the old house full of memories of Allison. James had fixed the basketball hoop over the garage for Sophie and was now sipping coffee and looking at the empty shelves. His new job as vice president of Pinnacle Financial brought in more money, but the move wasn't just about convenience. He wanted a fresh start for himself and his daughter. Sophie came down to the kitchen, wearing her basketball uniform and carrying a backpack over her shoulder. Dad, can you take me to school? She asked, grabbing a banana from the table. We have practice before the game. Sure, James said, putting his mug in the sink. How do you like the new house? Cool, Sophie said, smiling. My room is bigger, and the yard is cool. Can I get another ring? We'll see, James said, laughing. Let's unpack the boxes first. Did you see the letter from Mom? Sophie frowned, her smile fading. Yes, she said, opening the refrigerator. She writes every week. The last one came yesterday. Says she's got a new job. I want to meet up. What do you think? James asked, looking at her. The judge gave her permission to see you. You don't have to, but... I don't know, Sophie said, taking the yogurt. She seems to be trying, but I'm still angry. Maybe I will, but not now. It's up to you, James said, taking the keys. I'll support you. They walked out to the car and James drove Sophie to school, parking her outside the gym. Good luck with practice, he said as she opened the door. Thanks, Dad, Sophie said with a wink. Don't forget the pizza tonight. James smiled and drove to the office. He thought about Sophie. She was softening, but her pain at Allison's betrayal was deep. He hoped that time and Allison's letters would help, but he didn't want to push. Allison Walker sat in her new office at Winnetka High School in Chicago at 9 a.m. on July 2nd. Her desk was piled high with folders, and a calendar with her counseling schedule hung on the wall. After an affair and divorce, Linda Harris's rumors had damaged her reputation at Evanston High, and she had quit. The new job in Winnetka, recommended by a colleague, was a chance to start over. Jane Kelly, the school's principal, greeted her warmly, asking no questions about her past. Allison opened her laptop, checking her email. Among the work emails was a message from Sophie, sent yesterday. Mom, I read your letter. I'm still angry. If you really want to fix everything, prove it. Don't call or come over until I tell you to. Allison reread it, feeling her heart clench. It was the first time Sophie had responded in a month, but the terms were strict. Allison wrote a reply but didn't send it, deciding to discuss it with Dr. Laura Miller, her psychologist, at her session the following day. At 10 o'clock, Jane walked into the office. Allison, how are you? She asked, holding up a folder. We have a new student with behavioral problems. Can you take him? Of course, Allison said, smiling. Send him tomorrow. Great, Jane said as she left. I'm glad you're with us. Allison felt energized. The new job gave her a purpose, but she couldn't stop thinking about Sophie. She wanted to prove she had changed, but how? That evening she returned to Margaret's, put her bag in the spare room, and sat down at the table. Margaret came in carrying a plate of pasta. Allison, eat, she said, setting the plate down. How's work? Okay, Allison said, picking up her fork. The principal is nice. The kids are tough, but I can handle it. Mom, Sophie answered my letter. Really? Margaret sat down opposite him, her eyes lighting up. What does he say? That she's still mad, Allison said, her voice dropping. She set conditions, no calls, no meetings until she says yes, but it's better than silence. That's a step forward, Margaret said, smiling. Write to her, but don't push. She'll come when she's ready. Allison nodded, feeling warmth from her mother's words. She ate, thinking about the next letter. She needed to show Sophie that she was changing without violating her boundaries. Sophie sat in her new room in James's house on the evening of Sunday, July 6th. The window looked out onto the backyard, where James had installed a second basketball hoop. She scrolled through her phone, checking her email. A new email from Allison had arrived that morning. Sophie, I respect your conditions. I work at a new school. I go to a psychologist to become a better person. I will not call or come, but I am always here when you want. Love you. Mom. Sophie reread it, feeling vaguely warm, but also irritated. Allison had tried, but the pain of her betrayal had not gone away. James walked in holding a box of pizza. Dinner's on the table, he said, setting the box on the nightstand. Pepperoni, just the way you like it. Thanks, Dad, Sophie said, closing her phone. Mom wrote again. She says she's working at a new school. She wants to meet, but I'm not ready. It's your choice, James said, sitting down on the bed. But she's been writing for a month. Maybe we should give her a chance. Not forgive her, just talk. Sophie sighed, looking at the ball against the wall. Maybe, she said, but only if I decide so. I don't want her to think everything is forgotten. I understand, James said, patting her on the shoulder. Let me know when you decide. I'll drive you. Sophie nodded, opening the box. They ate while watching the match on TV in the living room. After dinner, she returned to the room, opened her laptop, and began writing, Mom, I got your letter. I'll think about meeting, but only on my terms. Saturday at the cafe on Main Street at 2 o'clock. No tears or excuses. If you start, I'll leave. Sophie. She hit send, her heart pounding. It was a risk, but she wanted to see if her mother had changed. Allison sat in Laura Miller's office at 10 a.m. on Monday, July 7th. The rain had stopped, and the sun was shining into the room. Sophie answered, Allison said, her voice shaking with emotion. She's agreed to meet me at the coffee shop on Saturday, but she has her conditions. No tears, no excuses, or she'll leave. That's huge progress, Laura said, smiling. Sophie trusts you enough to meet. Respect her boundaries. Listen, don't make excuses. Show that you've changed. I'm scared, Allison said, clasping her hands. What if she leaves or hates me even more? She's already made a move, Laura said. That means she wants to try. Be honest, but restrained. And keep working on yourself. A new job is a good sign. Allison nodded, feeling hopeful. She walked out of the office, got into her car, and reread Sophie's letter on her phone. Saturday was in 5 days. She knew this was her chance, and she didn't want to miss it. In the evening, she returned to Margaret, put her bag in the hallway, and went into the kitchen. Mom, Sophie wants to meet, she said, sitting down at the table. On Saturday at the cafe. Oh, Allison, Margaret hugged her. I knew she'd soften. Be careful, but don't be afraid. Allison smiled, feeling warm. She picked up her notebook and started to write another letter, but stopped. Sophie had asked her not to write until the meeting. Allison closed the notebook, deciding to wait. She went to bed, imagining how she would hug her daughter if all went well. James and Sophie were having dinner in the new living room, watching a basketball game. Are you sure about Saturday? He asked, taking a bite of pizza. Yes, Sophie said, looking at the screen. I want to see what she says, but if she starts whining, I'm leaving. I'll be there, James said, smiling. Call me if anything happens. Sophie nodded, feeling ready to meet. She wanted to give her mother a chance, but she wasn't going to forgive easily. On a Saturday afternoon, the Willow and Bean on Main Street smelled warmly of cinnamon and freshly roasted beans. July drifted lazily past the picture windows, and inside, couples and students chatted quietly at tables, the anxious but peaceful hum of other people's lives. At the back of the room, Sophie Walker sat with her back to the wall, an Apple Watch ticking away the seconds until 2 p.m. She had come early on purpose, to lay down the rules on her turf. A basketball sneaker lay clutched in the cracks on the table, a talisman brought as an unspoken reminder of who she was and why she had the right to dictate terms. Before the meeting, she had dumped a few extra angry messages into her notes, crossed them out, and left only 4 bullet points. Without a tear. Without accusing the Pope. A clear plan for how you change. If you break it, I'm leaving. Her hands were still shaking. Since her father had dropped her off at the entrance, wishing her strength and peace, she had managed to run through her head dozens of possible scenarios. But the worst one remained the same. Her mother would come in, burst into tears, start making excuses, and thus confirm the worst, that adults also lose their temper, ignoring boundaries as if they didn't exist. At 1:58 p.m., the door rang. Allison stepped inside and immediately found her daughter with her eyes. Sophie noticed the change. No high heels or designer dress. Instead, a simple azure blouse, jeans, and hair pulled back into a ponytail. No jewelry, just a thin silver chain and, most importantly, no makeup, as if her mother had decided not to hide the tired circles under her eyes. Allison walked up to the counter, ordered a decaf tea, then slowly moved toward the table. Sophie made a mental note. Did not bring anything for bribe, no toys, no chocolate. That's already a plus. Hello, Sophie said calmly, crossing her arms. Hello, honey, Allison responded just as quietly. The pause absorbed the clink of spoons, the hum of a coffee grinder, and laughter from the next table. I remember the terms, Allison began evenly. I'll do without tears. If my voice falters, it's not a performance, it's work on myself. But I have it under control. Sophie nodded, unclenching her fingers. Second, I won't blame my dad. What happened was my choice and my consequences. Now I'm learning not to shift responsibility. Sophie felt relief and irritation rise up inside her. Hearing the right words was easier than waiting to say them herself. Third, Allison continued, a concrete plan. I see a psychologist once a week. I have a support group for partners who have gone through a family crisis and a mentor. At my new job, the director writes a monthly recommendation report on my professional stability. I set a goal to get a license as a full-time supervisory psychologist in a year. I'm working on reflecting on jealousy and, she paused briefly, a tendency to believe other people's rumors. Sophie raised an eyebrow. It sounds systematic, she said. But reports and licenses are external. What about the internal? Allison pulled a small black notebook out of her bag. I keep a confession and action journal. On the recommendation of a therapist, I write down what I feel when the impulse to blame or get scared arises. Then what action I take instead of closing down. Want to see it? Sophie held out her hand. Flipping through the pages, she saw neat dates, columns for trigger, emotion, conscious response. No tearful confessions, just the facts. Sophie returned the notebook. Okay, Mom, you've prepared yourself. But she took a breath, gathering her courage. Then why did all this happen? You always talked about trust as a foundation. How could you believe other people's gossip instead of your own husband? Allison pressed her palms to her cup of tea. Fear. Fear of being the last one to know, of looking stupid. I chose reaction over conversation. I can explain the mechanisms, but that's not an excuse. It's a fact. I was scared and didn't ask the one I should have trusted first. And instead of experiencing shame, I went into a rage. Sophie silently twirled the lace of her sneaker in her fingers. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Allison continued quietly. Forgiveness is a privilege given, not demanded. I'm prepared to wait a long time if you're willing to give it at all. Right now, I'm asking only for contact. Once a week, 15 minutes, where you decide the length and the topics. Sophie looked her mother straight in the eyes. There were no tears, only intense honesty. Okay, she said. Sophie sighed. You know, I wasn't just angry because of you and Dad. I was angry that the adult I trusted was as flawed as everyone else. Maybe even more so because you teach others how to deal with their emotions. Allison tilted her head. It's true, and I'm working with this Shane too. The silence stretched, not threatening, more resigned. Within it, Sophie found herself ready to listen. Time passed unnoticed as they traded scraps of plans and boundaries. The clock read 2:40 p.m. I have to go, Sophie said, standing up. Practice is at 3. Thank you for coming, Allison said quietly, making no attempt to hug. She merely added, I'm here if you want me. Sophie nodded and stepped toward the exit. Her own reflection flashed in the doorway. Her face was tired, but her shoulders were straight. At the exit, she suddenly turned around. Mom. Allison looked up. Next time, let's go to Lakeside Gelato. And no need for a notepad. Just talk. The corners of Allison's lips twitched, as you say. 1 month later. On Friday night in James's new house, the backyard smelled of freshly cut grass. Sophie was shooting a ball through the newly installed second hoop, and James was sitting on the steps of the deck, looking at reports on his tablet. Dad, look, Sophie made a difficult feint, pushed off and spun the three-pointer. The ball clanged and the net slammed. Wow, if universities saw this summer, they'd be pocketing their scholarships, James chuckled. Sophie picked up the ball and moved closer. Speaking of pockets, she reached into her shorts and pulled out an envelope. It's from Mom. A new letter. James put the tablet down. Have you read it? Yes. She sent a copy of her certificate of completion of the first supervision module, and Sophie rolled her eyes, a long paragraph about how difficult but useful it is to work with the shadow of jealousy. No tears, by the way. James nodded, hiding his pride behind a neutral expression. And your plan? Sophie sat down next to her. I think we can extend the meetings to half an hour. She keeps her word. Okay, James said. She nudged him with her elbow. Stop being perfect. Do you have a life outside of reports? A vice president is supposed to live deep, he joked. But the face of Caroline, the new head of the analytics department, with whom he had already had lunch twice, came to mind. Sophie narrowed her eyes. Let's write it down like that. Life, lunch with Caroline. James raised his hands. Okay, maybe I'll invite her to the exhibition. Sophie nodded in satisfaction and darted towards the ring, leaving her father smiling in the sunset shadows. November. The trial was shorter than expected. Allison did not contest the divorce, agreeing to the terms, joint legal custody while Sophie lived with her father, scheduled visits, flexible to her daughter's wishes, equal participation in college tuition. The judge, satisfied with the conciliatory tone, signed the papers. James walked out of the courthouse with light shoulders and a sense of a closed door. He and Allison were no longer married, but they could still be parents. That same day, he sent Sophie a laconic message. The divorce is officially finalized. All clear. Love. The answer came instantly. I love it. Shall we order sushi? January next year. At Northwestern University College, the windows of the admissions office glowed. Sophie sat on a bench in front of the building, clutching an envelope. James and Allison stood apart. At their daughter's request, they had come together, but they kept a respectful distance. Open up, Allison said, noticing Sophie's fingers turning white. The girl tore the edge and, unfolding the sheet, froze. Got it, she cried. Her eyes lit up and the basketball slipped from her hands. James made the first move, but remembered the agreement in time Mum first if Sophie hesitated. He stopped. Allison approached her daughter slowly, her eyes clearly asking permission. Sophie nodded and accepted the cautious embrace. Then she turned to her father, and he hugged them both, forming a circle where past hurts were compressed to a point. Being able to play for the Wildcats is awesome, Sophie whispered. You deserve it, James said. We're proud of you, Allison added. That evening, the three of them ate dinner at a small Greek restaurant. The conversation was about campus, classes, and training. No one mentioned the trial in March, or James's promotion to senior vice president in December, or Allison's January certificate for completing the family trauma therapy course. The future demanded new topics. There were two cars in the college parking lot, James's Ford Explorer and Allison's Honda Accord. Boxes, bedding, books, and basketball shoes were all mixed up as they raced up the stairs. In her double room, Sophie had put up a picture of herself holding her acceptance letter between her parents. It's a wonderful irony, she smiled at her freshman roommate. This photo was taken exactly a year after my family exploded, and now a new beginning. The neighbor didn't know the details, but she nodded, sensing something important in his voice. Once things were unpacked, James and Allison helped set up the laptop, checked the schedule, and then came the inevitable parting. Darling, Allison said, hugging Sophie, I'm here if you need me, but I won't pry. Write whenever you want. I will, Mom, Sophie replied. She did write once a week, briefly but consistently. James hugged his daughter. If you play, play freely. If you study, study curiously. We are always nearby from the stands. Just don't yell, that's my girl, into the TV camera, okay? Sophie giggled. No promises, he winked. After the cars left, Sophie stayed in the room. She took a new notebook out of the drawer, a gift from Allison. On the first page, in calligraphy handwriting, was written, "Leave the past as fertile soil, not as a chain. Mom." Sophie added below, "The future is like a free throw. Everything is in my hands." 2 years later, in the corporate lounge of the Hyatt Regency Hotel on the banks of the Chicago River, Pinnacle Financial's Christmas Bazaar was booming. James, now a senior executive, held the microphone. "Every bid you make in our auction goes to a scholarship fund for young female athletes. This is a personal story for me. One of these girls once proved that resilience and perseverance overcome any drama." He paused, catching Sophie's eye in the front row. She was on holiday, wearing a coat the color of university purple and a wildcat scarf. To his right was Allison, now a supervisor of school psychologists for the district. To his left was Caroline, whom James had formally introduced as his partner. Not his fiancée, not his new mum, just an adult with whom he felt comfortable building a life. There was applause in the room. The auction began. Among the lots was a ball signed by Sophie Walker, the captain of the women's university team, which eventually went for $5,000 to some enthusiast from the legal department. James just shook his head. "I used to worry about fake messages. Now people are paying for my daughter's signature." After the ceremony, the three of them went out onto the terrace, where snowflakes danced in the light of the garlands. "Dad, Mom," Sophie began, putting her hands in her pockets, "I have a present for you." She handed over 2 envelopes. Inside each were tickets to the NCAA Women's Final Four. "I want to see you both on the podium. No sound wars and Team Dad or Team Mom flags. Deal?" Allison smiled and looked at James, who shrugged and extended his hand. "Agreement," they said simultaneously. Sophie raised her eyebrows. "And another condition. Mom, leave Linda Harris alone. Dad, don't hide the relationship with Caroline. Live honestly, as you taught me in the end." James chuckled. Allison nodded seriously. "I owe you honesty," James said. "And I have to distance myself from toxic friends," Allison added. Sophie hugged them both. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.